The back end flagged it. The 30-year just hit 5.20%. Highest since 2007. That's what repriced everything today. The scan's top ETF and stock are still ahead, and they'll surprise you. SPX and QQQ both closed hard in the red. The S&P's worst single-day drop since June 10th. QQQ got hit harder, with semiconductors posting their worst two-day stretch since last October. The Nasdaq's weekly momentum has been bearish for 6 consecutive weeks. This isn't a one-day blip, and what bonds did today is exactly what put that ceiling on every rebound attempt. The 30-year yield crossed 5.20%, the highest reading since 2007, and TLT broke through its key support. Here's what the backend flagged though. DXY actually softened on the session, even with 3 hawkish Fed dissenters. So the dollar and bonds aren't telling the same story right now. Part of that bond pressure traces back to Japan selling a massive block of US Treasuries to defend the yen. Oil-driving inflation is pouring fuel on the yield move. And that's exactly where we go next. Energy led every S&P sector today. XLE up nearly 2%, crude up almost 7%, and USO printing a new year-to-date high. Oil spiked on Middle East supply pressure before easing back after news of a diplomatic pause on Iran. But here's the tension the system surfaced. If that diplomatic off-ramp materializes, today's sector leader flips to headwind fast. The chart and the macro story don't line up cleanly right now. That divergence is exactly why metals caught a completely different kind of bid. Gold held above 4,000 with the Fed on hold. And with DXY softening, that's the tailwind the back end wasn't going to miss. GLD's institutional accumulation reads elevated. Silver is flagging a paper-to-physical supply gap, and copper is sitting on a confirmed 2026 production deficit. Asian demand feeding into that copper shortfall is part of what's happening in the markets to the east right now. EFA barely moved, but EEM got sold. Asian semiconductor pressure is doing the damage. SK Hynix dragged down a leveraged ETF that was the single largest fund by assets in Hong Kong. That unwind isn't finished. Japan dumped $66 billion in US Treasuries in a single month to defend the yen. A bond supply shock that ripples right back into everything we saw in the macro data. When this kind of leveraged semiconductor selling cascades globally, speculative risk assets don't stay insulated. Bitcoin is holding near 64,000, but a $1.26 billion exit out of IBIT says institutional hands aren't fully committed here. The 50-day moving average is the critical line. Indicators split right at it, some bullish, some bearish. The resistance band above is dense, and below that level, a stop order cluster could accelerate any breakdown. With risk off across equities and semis, figuring out where leadership actually held through all of this is exactly what the scan was built to surface. That 30-year print is still the weight pressing on everything in this tape. The #1 ETF and stock this scan surfaced are still ahead. SignalFinder Pro's best of best processed 129 symbols. Here's the shortlist it surfaced through today's selling. The top 3 sectors from the scan: financials in first, healthcare second, real estate third. All 3 closed lower on the session, but the engine scores relative strength through pullbacks, not just green tapes. These are the pockets where the selling stayed most orderly. The #1 ETF from the scan? RXL, ProShares Ultra Healthcare. A leveraged healthcare basket ranking first on a red session is the back end calling out relative strength where selling was most contained. Signal state is watch. The system has flagged the structure. It's not a cleared setup yet. The #1 stock from the scan? Apple. The largest mega cap in the market closed only modestly lower, while everything around it took bigger hits, and the system scored it first. Signal state is ready. The selling stayed orderly right at the top of the market structure. The 30-year at 5.20% wasn't just a yield number today. It was the ceiling on every bounce the S&P tried to build. And the thread connecting the bond pressure, the energy spike, and the semiconductor unwind. The thing to watch tomorrow: does the 30-year hold at resistance or push through? That answer resets the whole character of this next move. Verify both live in SignalFinder Pro. And remember, this is educational content, not financial advice. Do your own homework.